Chapter 1. The day began like any other, with Owen wreaking havoc in the kitchen while I attempted to salvage what was left of breakfast. "Mom, I didn't mean to," he exclaimed, wide-eyed, as the shattered remains of a cereal bowl decorated the floor. I pinched the bridge of my nose, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "Owen, I love you, but if I have to clean up one more mess this week, I'm going to." "You're going to what?" he interrupted, flashing me a toothy grin that was both infuriating and adorable. "Nothing," I muttered, grabbing the broom from the corner. "I'm going to clean this up because I'm your mother. And that's what mothers do. But I'm helping," he said, his small hands already grabbing at the pieces of ceramic. I shot him a look, the kind of look that said, "Don't test me. Hands off. I don't need another trip to the clinic, because you cut yourself." He sighed dramatically, flopping into a chair at the kitchen table. "I was just trying to pour the milk," he said, his voice small now. I softened immediately. "I know, sweetheart, but maybe next time let me help, okay?" He nodded solemnly, but I caught the glimmer of mischief in his eyes, the kind that told me this wouldn't be the last of his accidents. Life with Owen was a delicate balance of chaos and love, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But lately the chaos had been tipping into uncharted territory. He was only 5, but there was something about him, something more than his boundless energy and his too quick for his age wit, something unnatural. It started small. A toy car that rolled across the room without anyone touching it. A gust of wind in the middle of a perfectly still day when he was upset. And then last week, the vase in the living room had exploded into 100 pieces during a tantrum. I'd blamed it on his growing strength or clumsiness, but deep down, I knew better. Owen wasn't like other kids, and I couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with him. I pushed the thought aside as I walked Owen to the PAX common area later that morning. The other kids were already playing, their laughter echoing through the trees that surrounded the PAX sprawling territory. "Be good," I told him, crouching down to meet his eyes. "I'm always good," he said, grinning again. I raised an eyebrow. "Owen." Okay, he relented, throwing his arms around my neck for a quick hug before darting off to join the others. I watched him for a moment, my chest tightening with a mix of pride and worry. Being a single mother wasn't easy, especially in a pack where most people looked at me like I was half a person without a mate. But Owen made it all worth it. I turned to leave, heading toward my usual spot near the pack house where I could keep an eye on him without hovering. But as I rounded the corner, I froze. There, standing just outside the pack house, was Logan Reed. He looked different. The Logan I remembered had been all easy confidence and charm, with a mischievous smile and an energy that lit up a room. The man standing before me now was harder, his features sharper, his eyes darker. There were scars, too thin, pale lines cutting across his hands and peeking out from the collar of his shirt. But it was him. I would have known him anywhere. "Logan?" I breathed, my voice barely audible. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, and I felt the weight of years of unanswered questions, heartbreak, and longing crash down on me. "Luna," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. My heart stuttered, 1,000 emotions surging all at once: anger, disbelief, hope. But before I could say anything else, the pack house door opened, and someone called his name, breaking the moment. I turned on my heel and walked away before he could see the tears threatening to spill. Even as I walked away from Logan, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't stop the flood of memories crashing over me like an unstoppable tide. The years hadn't dulled them, if anything. Seeing him again sharpened every detail, every moment that had led us here. The first time I met Logan Reed, I'd been balancing a tray of drinks at the PAX Spring Festival, trying to avoid tripping over my own feet. "Careful there," a deep voice said just as my foot caught on an uneven patch of ground. Before I could faceplant into the grass, a hand shot out, steadying me. "Gotcha," he said, his voice smooth and teasing. I looked up, ready to thank him and brush it off, but the words died in my throat. Logan Reed was the kind of handsome that made you forget how to speak: tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that always seemed to fall perfectly into place no matter how messy it got. But it wasn't just his looks. He had this energy about him, This effortless charisma that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. Thanks, I managed, my cheeks burning as I realized I was still holding onto his arm. Don't mention it, he said, his grin widening, but if you're trying to make an impression, falling face first into a tray of drinks isn't the way to do it. I wasn't trying to. I stopped, realizing he was teasing me. Oh, very funny, he laughed, the sound rich and warm. I'm Logan, by the way. And you are? Luna, I said, my voice steadier now. And I'm pretty sure I can handle walking without any more assistance. Thanks. Sure you can, he said, but the sparkle in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. From that moment on, Logan made it his mission to be wherever I was. At first, it was infuriating. I couldn't go a single day without bumping into him at training sessions, pack meetings, even grocery runs. He always had some snarky comment or a cocky grin. And no matter how much I told myself I wasn't interested, I couldn't deny the way my pulse quickened every time he was near. It wasn't until the annual moonlit run that I realized how much he'd gotten under my skin. The run was a tradition for the pack an evening under the full moon, where wolves could let loose, free of responsibilities and expectations. I hadn't planned on running that year, but somehow, Logan convinced me to join him. Come on, he said, standing at the edge of the forest with that infuriating grin of his. What's the point of being a wolf if you don't let loose once in a while? I rolled my eyes. Some of us prefer to keep our dignity intact. And some of us know how to have fun, he shot back, his voice low and teasing. The next thing I knew, we were running side by side through the trees, the wind rushing past us, and the moonlight casting a silver glow over everything. It felt like freedom, like nothing else mattered but the thrill of the run and the man beside me. When we finally stopped, panting and laughing, Logan turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, something softer, more serious. You're incredible, you know that? He said, his voice quieter now. I snorted, trying to brush it off. Yeah, right. I mean it, he said, stepping closer. You're strong, smart, beautiful, and you have no idea how amazing you are. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the kisses I'd imagined, quick, fleeting, easy to dismiss. This one was slow and deliberate, like he wanted to savor every second. And when I finally pulled back, breathless and wide-eyed, he just smiled like he knew exactly what he was doing to me. For months after that, we were inseparable. Logan wasn't perfect, he was stubborn and impulsive and way too cocky for his own good, but he made me feel alive in a way I never had before. With him, everything felt possible, so when he told me he wanted a future with me, I believed him. I trusted him. Until he disappeared. The memory faded, leaving me standing in the middle of the packhouse garden, with a hollow ache in my chest. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. Logan Reed might have been my everything once, but now he was just a ghost, a painful reminder of what I'd lost. And yet, as much as I wanted to hate him, part of me couldn't help but wonder why he was back. Would you like me to continue with Logan's unexpected return and first interaction with Owen? I managed to avoid Logan for the rest of the morning, though it felt more like running than avoiding. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. But fate, as always, had other plans. It was late afternoon when I heard the unmistakable sound of his voice. Luna. I froze mid-step, my hands full of groceries from the pack's communal pantry. I hadn't expected him to seek me out so quickly. Turning slowly, I found him standing a few feet away, his towering frame casting a long shadow in the sunlight. The Logan Reed I remembered had always been magnetic, his confidence, his charm, the way he carried himself like he owned every space he stepped into. But this Logan was different. His broad shoulders were still imposing, but they seemed burdened now, weighed down by something I couldn't see. And those eyes, once full of mischief and warmth, now held a guarded intensity that made my heart twist. What do you want, Logan? I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. To talk, he said, his tone softer than I expected. Please. I wanted to say no, to tell him to take his apologies, his explanations, and whatever lingering emotions he thought he could stir up and leave. But instead, I gestured toward the bench by the garden's edge, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us thick with unspoken words. "You look good," he started, his voice hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it. I let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, well, being a single mom will keep you on your toes." His brow furrowed, and I saw the question flash across his face, the one I wasn't ready to answer. "Luna," he said, his voice quieter now. "I know I can't change what happened, but I never stopped thinking about you." "Really?" I snapped, the bitterness spilling out before I could stop it, because disappearing without a word doesn't exactly scream I care. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked away, his hands clenching at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, strained. I didn't have a choice. I crossed my arms, not ready to let him off the hook. "That's convenient. Luna, I was taken," he said, the words heavy and deliberate. "By rogues. They ambushed me when I was out on patrol. I was their prisoner for 3 years. The air left my lungs all at once. 3 years, I repeated, the weight of it sinking in. He nodded, his eyes searching mine. "They wanted information about the pack. About you." My stomach twisted. I didn't want to believe him, but the raw pain in his voice made it impossible to dismiss. "And when you escaped?" I asked, my voice softer now, though my anger still simmered beneath the surface. "It wasn't that simple," he said, running a hand through his hair. "By the time I got out, I was barely holding myself together. I couldn't come back here, not like that." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I'd once known. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him that his pain didn't excuse what he'd put me through. But another part, the part that still remembered the way he used to make me feel, wanted to believe him. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore," he said simply. "I've spent every day, since I escaped, thinking about you, wondering if—" He hesitated, his eyes flicking away before meeting mine again. "Wondering if it was too late." I swallowed hard, my emotions warring inside me. "It might be." Logan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I deserve that." For a moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Then, as if the universe wanted to make things even more complicated, I heard a familiar voice. "Mom." I turned just in time to see Owen barreling toward me, his face alight with excitement. "Look what I found," he said, holding up a shiny rock like it was the greatest treasure in the world. Logan's gaze shifted to Owen, and I saw something flicker in his eyes: curiosity, recognition, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Who's that?" Owen asked, his head tilting as he studied Logan. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words got stuck in my throat. How was I supposed to explain this? Logan, for his part, seemed frozen, his eyes locked on Owen with an intensity that made my chest ache. "Luna," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "Who is he?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I looked between the two of them. "This is Owen," I said finally, my voice trembling. "My son." And just like that, the ground shifted beneath us. The silence that followed my words was louder than anything I'd ever experienced. "My son," I repeated, forcing myself to meet Logan's gaze. His expression was impossible to read: shock, confusion, and something deeper flickered in his eyes. Owen, oblivious to the storm brewing between us, tugged at my hand. "Mom, can I show him my rock? It's super shiny." I hesitated, my instincts screaming to protect Owen from what might come next. But before I could respond, Logan knelt down to Owen's level, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey, buddy," Logan said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "That's a pretty cool rock you've got there." Owen beamed, holding it up for Logan to see. "It's not just cool, it's the best one I've found all day." "See the sparkles?" Logan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I see them. You've got a good eye." I crossed my arms, watching the interaction with my heart lodged firmly in my throat. Seeing Logan like this, gentle, patient, and entirely captivated by Owen, was almost too much to handle. Owen tilted his head, studying Logan with the same curiosity I'd seen in him 100 times before. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone matter of fact. Logan froze, his gaze flicking to me for guidance. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "This is Logan," I said finally, my voice tight. "He's a friend of the pack." Logan's jaw tightened, but he didn't correct me. Instead, he turned back to Owen with a small, strained smile. "Nice to meet you, Owen." Owen grinned. "Nice to meet you too, Logan." He looked up at me, his expression bright. "Can he come with us to the lake tomorrow? I want to show him the skipping rocks." I blinked, caught off guard by the innocent question. "We'll see," I said, my voice wavering. Owen nodded, apparently satisfied, and darted off toward the other kids, leaving Logan and me alone in the garden. The moment Owen was out of earshot, Logan stood, his easy demeanor evaporating as he turned to me. "He's mine," he said, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. I crossed my arms, willing myself to stay calm. "What makes you say that?" "Luna," he said, stepping closer. "Don't play games with me? I can feel it." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. Of course he could. The bond between us, the one I thought had been severed years ago, was still there, humming faintly beneath the surface. And now, standing this close to him, it was impossible to ignore. "I wanted to tell you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you weren't here, Logan. You disappeared." His expression softened for a moment before hardening again. "You think I wouldn't have come back if I'd known? You think I wouldn't have fought to be here for both of you?" My anger flared, fueled by years of heartbreak and unanswered questions. "You weren't here," I said sharply. "And I did what I had to do to protect him." Logan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "I wasn't here. But I am now." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "It's not that simple, Logan. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to fall into place." "I'm not expecting that," he said, his voice soft but firm. I need to be part of his life, Luna. I need to make things right." For a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he could fix what had been broken, that he could be the father Owen deserved. But the years of pain and uncertainty wouldn't let me give in so easily. "We'll see," I said finally, echoing my earlier words. Logan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't. Chapter 2. That night, after Owen was asleep, I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. The soft rustle of leaves in the wind should have been soothing, but my mind was too full to let me rest. Seeing Logan again had stirred up memories I thought I'd buried long ago, memories that came rushing back with startling clarity. I remembered the moment I realized I was pregnant, as if it had happened yesterday. It was the smell of coffee that gave it away. I'd been helping set up for a pack meeting, the sharp aroma wafting from a tray of mugs making my stomach churn. At first, I thought it was just stress. I'd been on edge ever since Logan's disappearance. But then it happened again, and again, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. One trip to the clinic later, I had my answer. "You're about 6 weeks along," the pack doctor had said, her voice gentle but firm. "Everything looks healthy so far." I'd stared at her, the words not quite sinking in. 6 weeks. That meant, my breath caught as I did the math. Logan had been gone for over a month, by then, his absence leaving behind a gaping hole in my life. And now, here I was, carrying a piece of him with me. When I finally made it back to my cabin, I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, clutching the test results in one hand and a mug of cold tea in the other. What was I supposed to do? The pack would have supported me if I'd told them, I knew that much. But I also knew what they'd say behind closed doors. A single mother, the mate of the alpha, who had vanished without a trace. The whispers would have followed me everywhere. And then there was Owen. I didn't want him growing up in the shadow of questions and judgment, constantly compared to the father he'd never know. So I made a decision. I told no one. Not about the pregnancy. Not about the nights I spent lying awake, wondering where Logan was and why he'd left. Not about the moments when fear and doubt threatened to swallow me whole. It wasn't easy. I spent months dodging curious glances, pretending the baby bump wasn't there, and making excuses for my absence from pack events. By the time Owen arrived, I'd grown used to the secrecy. When I held him for the first time, his tiny fingers curling around mine, I knew I'd made the right choice. but that didn't mean it was easy. There were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I'd look at Owen and wonder how I was going to give him everything he needed. And then there were the times he reminded me so much of Logan it made my chest ache. The way he grinned, that lopsided, mischievous smile that was pure Logan, the way he tilted his head when he was curious, or the stubborn set of his jaw when he didn't get his way. As much as I tried to ignore it, Logan was always there, woven into the fabric of our lives in ways I couldn't escape. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I blinked, realizing I'd been staring out the window for hours, the tea in my mug long gone cold. Rising slowly, I opened the door to find Sophia standing there, her arms crossed and her sharp eyes studying me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, arching an eyebrow. "Something like that," I muttered, stepping aside to let her in. "Logan's back," she said bluntly, not bothering with pleasantries. "I noticed," I replied, crossing my arms. Sophia studied me for a long moment before sighing. "You going to tell him?" "Tell him what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. Her gaze narrowed. "Luna, don't play dumb. You think he's not going to figure it out? Owen is practically his clone." I flinched, the truth of her words hitting harder than I wanted to admit. "It's not that simple," I said quietly. "Nothing ever is," Sophia said, her tone softening. "But you owe it to both of them to figure this out." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew she was right. The next morning, the pack gathered in the courtyard for the weekly meeting. It was a routine event, one I usually attended without much thought. But today, the air was thick with tension. Everyone knew Logan was back, and the wolves of the Crescent Moon pack weren't exactly known for their subtlety. I walked in with Owen by my side, his small hand clutching mine as he chattered about the bug he'd found outside. I forced a smile, nodding along as he spoke. But my focus was on the crowd, on the way they whispered behind cupped hands, their eyes flicking toward Logan as he stood near the pack leaders. He looked out of place. Logan Reed, the once magnetic alpha who could command a room with a single glance, now stood slightly apart, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the ground. The scars on his face caught the sunlight, and I noticed the way some of the wolves' eyes lingered on them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. "Mom, look." Owen tugged at my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. He pointed toward a patch of grass where a small butterfly flitted between the flowers. "It's so pretty." I smiled, kneeling beside him. "It is, isn't it? Maybe it'll stick around for a while." "Like Logan?" he asked, his voice innocent and far too loud. My heart dropped into my stomach as I felt the weight of several gazes turn toward us. I forced a laugh, brushing a stray curl from Owen's forehead. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said lightly, though the words felt like a lie. Logan approached as the meeting began to wrap up. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, moving slowly, deliberately, like he was trying not to spook anyone. When he reached us, Owen was crouched by a pile of stones, carefully arranging them into a tower. "Hey," Logan said, his voice low. It was meant for me, but Owen turned first. "Hi, Logan," he said brightly, grinning up at him. "Want to see my rock tower?" Logan hesitated, his gaze flicking to me for a moment before he crouched beside Owen. "Sure," he said. "Let's see what you've got." As Owen launched into an enthusiastic explanation about his rock tower's super strong foundation, I couldn't help but notice how stiff Logan looked. He wasn't the same man I remembered, the one who could charm anyone with a quick smile and an easy laugh. This Logan seemed unsure, like he didn't know where he fit anymore. When Owen ran off to find another perfect rock, Logan straightened, rubbing the back of his neck. "He's spirited," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "He is," I replied, crossing my arms. "Takes after me." Logan's smile faded, and for a moment the easy banter I'd been expecting didn't come. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. "They don't trust me," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Can you blame them?" I shot back before I could stop myself. His jaw tightened and I sighed. "You've been gone for a long time, Logan. People have questions. They're wary. That's just how it is." "I didn't want to leave," he said, his tone soft but firm. I didn't have a choice. I crossed my arms tighter, unwilling to let the cracks in my defenses show. Well, you're here now. I guess we'll see how that goes. Logan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice called out from across the courtyard. Logan, Lucas, one of the senior pack members, approached with a wary smile. Alpha wants to see you. Logan nodded, his expression unreadable as he turned to follow Lucas. He glanced back at me once, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement of the mess we were in and the history that still lingered between us. As he walked away, Owen came bounding back, clutching a particularly jagged rock like it was treasure. Did Logan see my tower? He did, I said, brushing a hand over his curls. And he thought it was great. Owen grinned, and I forced a smile in return, my mind already racing. Logan might be back, but nothing about this was going to be easy. It started with a grin. Owen had just successfully built what he called the biggest rock tower in the entire pack, and when it inevitably toppled, he let out this sharp burst of laughter that caught Logan completely off guard. I saw it the way Logan's head tilted ever so slightly, the faint crease in his brow, as his eyes tracked Owen's every move. It wasn't just the laugh, though that alone could have been enough. It was the way Owen scrunched his nose after, almost like he was proud of the chaos he'd caused. It was a look I'd seen 100 times before. On Logan. That's familiar, Logan murmured, almost to himself. What is? I asked, trying to sound casual even though my heart had started racing. Logan turned to me, his expression unreadable. That laugh, he said softly, and the nose thing. I felt a lump rise in my throat but forced a shrug. Kids pick up all sorts of habits. Maybe, he said, but the look he gave me said he wasn't buying it. The next time it happened, we were at the pack training grounds. Owen had tagged along with me while I checked in on a few of the younger wolves, and before I could stop him, he'd joined an impromptu game of tag. It wasn't just that Owen was fast, he was really fast, faster than a kid his age had any right to be. He darted between the older kids with a kind of ease that made me wonder if he'd been sneaking off to practice when I wasn't looking. Logan watched him, his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He's quick, he said after a long silence. Yeah, he's got a lot of energy, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Logan didn't respond right away, his eyes narrowing as he followed Owen's movements. It's not just energy, he said finally. There's something about the way he moves. It's familiar. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the clipboard I'd been pretending to use as a distraction. He's 5, Logan. All kids are full of energy. Logan turned to me, his expression sharper now. Luna. His voice had a weight to it, the kind that made it impossible to dodge the subject. What? I asked, feigning innocence. Does he know? Logan asked, his voice low. About me? I hesitated, torn between the urge to protect Owen and the creeping guilt of keeping the truth from Logan. Not yet, I said finally. Logan's jaw tightened, and he turned back toward Owen, who was now hanging upside down from a low branch, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. He should, Logan said after a moment. He deserves to know. And what about you? I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. Do you deserve to know? After disappearing for years? Logan flinched, and for a second, I almost regretted the words. Almost. You're right, he said quietly. I don't deserve anything. But that doesn't change the fact that he's mine. Later that day, Owen fell asleep on the couch, one arm draped over his favorite stuffed wolf. Logan lingered by the doorway, his expression softer now, though no less conflicted. He even sleeps like you, I muttered, mostly to myself. Logan looked at me, his eyes searching. Luna, why didn't you tell me? I sighed, sinking into the chair across from him. Because you weren't here, Logan, and I didn't know if you ever would be. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. I miss so much, he said, his voice barely audible. Yeah, I said, my throat tightening. You did. We sat in silence after that, the weight of everything unsaid filling the room. For the first time, I saw something in Logan that I hadn't noticed before, not just regret, but determination. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. Logan wasn't going to walk away this time. The family gathering had started off fine enough, The pack gathered under the canopy of trees near the main house, the smell of grilled meat and laughter filling the air. Owen was in his element, darting between clusters of people, his energy boundless as always. I should have known better than to let my guard down. "Owen," I called, balancing a plate in one hand while scanning the crowd for his telltale mop of curls. "Stay where I can see you." "Okay, Mom," he shouted back, which was code for I'm going to do exactly the opposite. I sighed, setting the plate down and scanning the crowd again. Logan's voice startled me. "He's over by the fire pit," he said, appearing beside me like a shadow. I glanced at him, my pulse doing an irritating little skip. "Thanks," I muttered, brushing past him. Logan followed, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "He's got your energy, you know. Always moving. And your inability to listen," I shot back, throwing him a sidelong glance. That earned me a soft chuckle. And I hated how much I liked the sound of it. By the time I reached the fire pit, Owen was already halfway through a demonstration of his super cool spin kick for the other kids. The problem? He had zero spatial awareness. "Owen, careful," I called, but the warning came too late. His kick connected with a half-full plate, sending it flying into the air like a frisbee. The kids shrieked, ducking for cover as mashed potatoes and barbecue sauce rained down. I was about to jump in when something far worse happened. The fire in the pit surged. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker, like someone had stoked it with fresh logs. But then it roared, flames leaping higher than they should have, the heat pulsing like a heartbeat. The laughter and chaos turned to silence. The kids froze, their wide eyes locked on the fire. I could see the faint shimmer of something unnatural in the air, something I knew all too well. Owen's hands were outstretched, his face a mask of concentration. "Owen," I said sharply, moving toward him. "Stop." He flinched, his concentration breaking as his hands dropped. The flames subsided almost immediately, but the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the crowd, the adults exchanging uneasy glances. Logan was already moving. He reached Owen before I could, crouching down to meet his wide, tear-filled eyes. "It's okay," Logan said gently, his voice steady despite the tension crackling around us. "It's okay, buddy. Take a deep breath." "I didn't mean to," Owen choked out, his lower lip trembling. "I know," Logan said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It was an accident. You're not in trouble." I knelt beside them, my heart pounding as I pulled Owen into a hug. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, smoothing his curls. "We've got you." By the time the crowd dispersed and the whispers faded, Logan and I had managed to usher Owen into the pack house. He clung to me, his small body trembling against mine as we settled him on the couch. "I didn't mean to," he said again, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I know, baby," I said, my heart breaking a little with each word. "It's okay, you're okay." Logan stood nearby, his arms crossed and his jaw tight. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the unspoken questions swirling in his eyes. "He's special," Logan said finally, his voice low. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "I know. We need to figure this out," he continued, his tone firm but not unkind. "Before it happens again." I nodded, my throat tight. "Agreed." For a moment the room was quiet except for Owen's soft sniffles. Then Logan crouched beside us, his eyes locked on mine. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice softer now. "Together." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded again. The unspoken tension between us was almost unbearable. But for the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same side. And that terrified me more than anything. Chapter 3. The eerie silence that followed the rogue wolf's breach was almost worse than the attack itself. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The pack had gathered near the main house, a mixture of fear and tension rippling through the crowd. I stood near the edge, my arms crossed tightly over my chest as I watched the patrol leaders report to Sophia, who was handling the situation with her usual no-nonsense efficiency. Logan stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the treeline, as though he expected the rogues to burst through at any moment. "They left this," one of the scouts said, holding up a piece of torn cloth. It was black, frayed at the edges, and marked with a smear of something dark and foul-smelling. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "What does it mean?" someone asked, their voice tinged with unease. Sophia's gaze flicked to Logan, her expression unreadable. "It's a warning," she said flatly. "A warning for who?" Another voice called. "For him," another wolf snarled, pointing at Logan. All eyes turned to him, and the air grew heavier still. Logan didn't flinch, though I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Not what we think." The wolf snapped, stepping forward. "Rogues haven't dared cross into our territory in years. You show up, and suddenly they're bold enough to leave warnings on our doorstep. Sounds like a coincidence to me." "Enough," Sophia said sharply, cutting through the rising tension. "This isn't the time for finger-pointing." "No," I said, stepping forward before I could think better of it. "It's not. But maybe it's time for some answers." Logan's eyes snapped to mine, something flickering in their depths surprise, maybe, or something closer to hurt. I ignored it, focusing instead on the rising anger that had been simmering beneath my skin since the moment he'd returned. "Luna," he said quietly, a warning in his tone. "No," I snapped. "You don't get to walk back into our lives with a storm following you and expect us to trust you blindly." I gestured toward the piece of cloth still dangling from the scout's hand. "What is this, Logan? What do they want?" He held my gaze for a long moment, the muscles in his jaw working. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging just slightly. "They want revenge," he said, his voice low. "Revenge for what?" I asked, crossing my arms tighter. "For escaping," he said simply. The crowd murmured again, but I barely heard it. My focus was locked on Logan, on the weight of his words and the haunted look in his eyes. "Escaping?" I echoed. Logan nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground for the first time. "I told you I didn't leave by choice," he said quietly. "The rogues took me, ambushed me on patrol. They kept me for 3 years, Luna. 3 years of torture, interrogation," and he broke off, his voice cracking. The murmur of the crowd faded into silence. Even the wolf who had been so quick to accuse him seemed at a loss for words. "I escaped," Logan continued after a moment, his voice steadier now, "but not before they got what they wanted." "And what was that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Information," he said simply, meeting my gaze again. "About the pack. About its defenses. About you." The breath left my lungs all at once. "Me?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You were my mate, Luna. They knew that. And they used it against me every chance they got." I didn't know what to say. The anger that had been driving me only moments ago had been replaced by something else, something heavier and harder to ignore. "So that's why they're here," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "Because of you." Logan nodded again, his shoulders stiffening. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, his voice cracked under the weight of the words. The pack began to disperse after Sophia called an end to the meeting, but the tension lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Logan stayed by the tree-line, his gaze fixed on the forest as though it might hold all the answers he didn't have. I should have left him there. I should have walked away and let him deal with whatever demons he was fighting. But instead, I found myself standing beside him, the silence between us both suffocating and strangely comforting. "You didn't tell me," I said finally. Logan turned to me, his expression unreadable. Would it have made a difference? I thought about it, about everything he'd said and everything he hadn't. "I don't know," I admitted. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "For what it's worth, Luna, I never stopped thinking about you, about what I left behind." For a moment I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he meant it, that he regretted everything as much as I did, but trust wasn't something I could give so easily, not anymore. "We'll see," I said, my voice quieter now. Logan nodded, and as we stood there in the fading light, I couldn't help but wonder if we were standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than either of us realized. The sky was tinged with the last traces of sunset as the pack house emptied, the day's tension lingering like a stubborn shadow. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the cold cup of tea I'd forgotten hours ago. My mind was a mess of thoughts I couldn't sort through, each one leading back to the man who was now leaning against the doorframe, watching me. Logan. His presence filled the room, even though he hadn't said a word. That was his way quietly commanding, even now when I was desperately trying to ignore him. "You've been quiet," he said finally, his voice low. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied, not looking up. "About me?" I laughed, but it was humorless. "Don't flatter yourself." The air between us thickened, the weight of our shared history pressing down on both of us. When I finally turned to face him, I found his gaze locked on mine, steady, but filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, his tone softer now. "About what?" I shot back, crossing my arms. "About how you disappeared without a word. How you left me to pick up the pieces of my life while you were off what? Playing hero? Surviving? What do you want me to say, Logan?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away. But instead, he took a step closer, his voice steady but strained. "I want you to say whatever you need to say, Luna. Yell at me, blame me. I deserve it." "Damn right you do," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The dam broke then, years of pain and anger spilling out as I stepped closer, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it was like? To wake up every day wondering where you were, if you were alive? To find out I was pregnant and know that my child would never know his father because you just left?" "I didn't leave," Logan said, his voice sharp now, cutting through my anger like a blade. "I was taken." The words stopped me cold. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Logan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "The rogues ambushed me on patrol. I didn't see it coming. They dragged me to one of their camps, kept me there for years. Tortured me. Used me." His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the weight of it all, the pain, the guilt, the scars he carried that ran far deeper than the ones on his skin. I stared at him, my heart twisting. "Logan, they wanted information about the pack," he continued, his voice steadier now but no less raw. "About you? Me?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You were my mate, Luna. They knew that. They used it against me, every chance they got. It was their way of breaking me." I felt the breath leave my lungs, my mind reeling with the weight of his words. I'd spent years hating him for leaving, for abandoning me when I needed him most. And now, I didn't know what to feel. "You could have come back," I said, my voice trembling. "I wanted to," Logan said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Every day I wanted to. But by the time I escaped, I wasn't the same. I didn't know if I could face you, if I could face what I'd left behind." The silence that followed was suffocating, the truth of his words hanging heavy in the air. "You hurt me," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Logan said, his voice breaking, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The anger that had fueled me moments ago was gone, replaced by something far more complicated. "I don't know if you can," I admitted, my heart aching. "I'll try," Logan said simply. And as much as I wanted to believe him, I couldn't ignore the part of me that was still too afraid to trust. The night had fallen silent, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears and made you feel smaller somehow. Owen was asleep in his room, and I was sitting on the worn-out couch, staring at the faint embers glowing in the hearth. Logan was nearby, leaning against the wall like he didn't trust the furniture to hold him. The tension between us was thick enough to cut, but neither of us dared to speak. I was still reeling from what he'd told me, and I could tell by the way he avoided my gaze that he wasn't sure how to navigate whatever this was between us. And then, the scream shattered the stillness. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and piercing, sending both of us to our feet in an instant. "Owen!" I bolted down the hallway, Logan close on my heels. When I burst into Owen's room, I found him sitting upright in bed, his small frame trembling, his wide eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. That glow wasn't natural, wasn't human, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Mom," his voice was small, shaking as he clutched the blankets. "I can't make it stop." "What happened?" Logan demanded, stepping into the room, his presence filling the space. "I don't know," I said, my heart racing as I moved to Owen's side. I placed a hand on his cheek, my voice softening. "Sweetheart, what do you mean? What can't you stop?" Owen's gaze darted between us, panic bubbling in his small voice. "The light. The noise, it's in my head, and it won't go away." Before I could respond, the lamp on his nightstand flickered. Then, with a loud pop, It exploded, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor. I flinched, pulling Owen closer as Logan stepped in front of us instinctively, shielding us with his broad frame. "Luna, get him out of here," Logan said, his voice low and commanding. "No," I snapped, holding Owen tighter. "He needs me." "Then help him," Logan said, turning back to look at me. His eyes softened, the hard edge in his voice giving way to something else. "He needs both of us right now." Owen's breathing was ragged, his small chest heaving as tears spilled down his cheeks. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed, burying his face in my shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," I murmured, stroking his hair. "I know." "Luna," Logan said, crouching beside us. "We need to calm him down before something else happens." I shot him a look. "And how exactly do you suggest we do that?" "Trust me," Logan said, his voice steady. He reached out, his large hand hovering just above Owen's back. "Owen," he said softly, "look at me." Owen peeked up at him, his glowing eyes wide and filled with fear. "You're okay," Logan said, his tone calm and soothing. "Breathe with me, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth, like this." He demonstrated his breath slow and deliberate. At first, Owen just stared, his small body still trembling. But then, slowly he mimicked Logan's movements, his breathing evening out little by little. The flickering energy in the room began to subside, the air losing its electric charge. When it was finally over, Owen slumped against me, exhausted but calm. Logan sank back on his heels, his gaze fixed on the boy who was already half asleep in my arms. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I looked at Logan. He shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not normal. Do you think I don't know that?" I snapped, my frustration spilling over. "Do you think I don't lie awake at night wondering how to help him? How to keep him safe?" Logan stood, his jaw tight. "I'm not blaming you, Luna. But we can't ignore this. If his powers are tied to the prophecy." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't start talking about prophecies and destinies. He's just a kid, Logan. He's more than that," Logan said, his voice firm. "And you know it." The truth of his words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I wasn't ready to admit it. "Not yet. I don't need you telling me how to protect my son," I said, my voice shaking. "Our son," Logan corrected, his gaze burning into mine. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with a deep breath, Logan softened, his voice quieter now. "I'm not here to fight you, Luna. I want to help." I looked at him, torn between the anger that still simmered in my chest and the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. "Fine," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "But this doesn't mean I trust you." "I'll take what I can get," Logan said, his lips quirking into a faint smile. I hated how much that smile still made my heart skip. Chapter 4. The night smelled of damp earth and pine, the air sharp and cool as I followed Logan through the dense trees. He moved with a predator's ease, every step deliberate, every sound absorbed into the shadows. I tried to focus on keeping up, on the weight of Owen resting in my arms, his small body limp from exhaustion. But my mind kept circling back to what had just happened. The rogues had come out of nowhere, their attack swift and brutal. If Logan hadn't been there, we wouldn't have stood a chance. And now, with Owen's powers spiraling out of control, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random strike. Logan slowed, his hand shooting up in a silent signal for me to stop. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears as I scanned the darkness around us. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away, his sharp gaze fixed on something in the distance. Then, without turning, he said, "We're being followed." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" He shot me a look over his shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "You're asking a wolf if he's sure about a scent?" I bit back a retort, tightening my grip on Owen as Logan crouched low, his movements as fluid as water. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely audible. "Stay here," I hissed. "Are you out of your mind? I'm not just going to." "Luna," he said sharply, cutting me off. "I need to know what we're dealing with. If something happens, you need to get Owen out of here. Promise me." I hated the way his tone made my stomach twist, the way his eyes pinned me to the spot, like he was trying to carve the words into my soul. But more than that, I hated that he was right. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "Just don't do anything stupid." His lips quirked into the faintest smile, a ghost of the man I used to know. No promises. The moments that followed felt like hours, each second stretching into an eternity. As I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, Owen stirred in my arms, his small hand clutching at my sweater. "Mom?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Shh, baby," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "It's okay, I've got you." I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince him or myself. Then a growl split the night, low and guttural. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Logan." I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but before I could move, a rogue burst through the underbrush. He was tall and wiry, his eyes glinting with malice as he snarled, his gaze zeroing in on me and Owen. I froze, my mind scrambling for a plan that didn't exist. And then Logan was there. He hit the rogue like a freight train, his claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. The two of them tumbled to the ground in a flurry of movement, and for a moment, all I could do was watch, my breath caught in my throat. Logan was faster, stronger, but the rogue was relentless, his movements wild and unpredictable. And then, as if sensing he was losing, the rogue did something I hadn't expected. He laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound, and it made my blood run cold. "You think you can protect them?" he sneered, his words directed at Logan even as he struggled beneath him. "You don't even know what you're protecting." Logan's claws pressed into the rogue's throat, his voice a low growl. "What are you talking about?" The rogue's grin widened, his teeth bared in a grotesque parody of a smile. "The boy," he said, his gaze flicking to Owen. "He's not just any pup, is he?" My stomach clenched, a wave of nausea rolling through me. "What do you know about him?" Logan demanded, his voice sharp and deadly. "More than you, it seems," the rogue taunted, his grin faltering as Logan's claws dug deeper. "But it's too late. They'll come for him. They'll come for all of you." Logan didn't hesitate. With a final brutal motion, he silenced the rogue, his body going limp beneath him. For a moment, the forest was quiet again, save for the sound of Logan's heavy breathing. Then he turned to me, his expression unreadable as his eyes locked onto mine. "Luna," he said, his voice rough, "what aren't you telling me?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This wasn't how I wanted him to find out, not here, not like this. But there was no hiding it anymore. "He's yours," I said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Logan, Owen is your son." Logan's expression didn't change at first, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, shock, disbelief, and then something deeper, something that made my heart ache. Before he could respond, Owen stirred again, his small voice breaking the tension. "Mom?" Logan looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the moment it clicked, the realization, the connection, the undeniable truth. "Luna," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." But the rustle of movement in the distance cut him off, the threat not yet over. "We will," I said, my voice firm, "but right now we need to run." Logan nodded, his focus shifting back to the forest around us. And as we moved together through the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The cabin Logan had led us to wasn't much, but it had walls, a roof, and, most importantly, a lock. The air inside was cool and faintly musty, the smell of cedar and old firewood lingering in the corners. Logan's presence filled the small space as he moved through it, his sharp eyes checking every window, every shadow. Owen, oblivious to the tension that thrummed between us, was curled up on the worn-out couch, his small frame rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. His curls stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat, but at least he was safe. For now. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms as I watched Logan double-check the lock on the front door. "Do you always keep a secret hideout in the middle of nowhere, or is this one of those alpha perks I missed out on?" Logan turned, the faintest flicker of amusement crossing his face. "It's called being prepared, Luna. You should try it sometime." "Oh, I've been prepared, I shot back. Prepared to raise a child on my own. Prepared to protect him when no one else would. Prepared for everything except you showing up again and dragging us into whatever fresh nightmare this is. His expression hardened, the playful edge in his tone disappearing. I didn't drag you into this. The rogues did, and in case you forgot, I just saved both of you. And I thanked you for that, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But don't think for a second that it erases everything else. Logan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he sighed, running a hand through his hair as he leaned against the doorframe. You're right, he said finally, his voice quieter. It doesn't. The admission caught me off guard, and for a moment, the fight drained out of me. Why are we here, Logan? I asked, my voice softer now. Because it's the only place I could think of where the rogues wouldn't follow us, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. And because I need to keep you both safe. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in my chest. You don't have to do this alone, I said, surprising even myself. Logan's eyes softened, but there was something else there too, something guarded. I'm not sure I know how to do it any other way. We settled into a tense, fragile rhythm as the hours passed. Logan kept watch near the windows while I stayed close to Owen, my fingers brushing through his curls as he slept. The quiet between us was heavy, but it wasn't unbearable. If anything, it felt like the calm before a storm. You should sleep, Logan said at one point, his voice cutting through the quiet. I glanced at him, arching an eyebrow. And let you stay up all night playing hero? No thanks. His lips quirked into a faint smile. It's not playing hero, Luna. It's survival. Same thing, I muttered, but the edge in my voice was gone. Logan crossed the room, his presence impossible to ignore as he crouched down beside me. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his gaze flicking between me and Owen. When did you know? He asked softly. I hesitated, my fingers stilling in Owen's hair. Know what? That he was mine, Logan said, his voice barely above a whisper. My chest tightened, the memory flashing through my mind like a wave crashing on the shore. From the moment I saw him, I admitted, my voice trembling, he has your eyes, your stubbornness, your smile. Logan's gaze softened, and for a moment, the walls between us felt thinner, the space between us smaller. I missed so much, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I looked at him, my heart aching with a mix of anger and longing. You did, I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, but neither of us broke it. Instead, we stayed there, side by side, the weight of everything we'd lost, and everything we still had hanging in the air. The cabin's quiet had become a comforting hum, the kind of silence that wrapped around you and let you forget. Just for a moment, the chaos waiting outside. Owen was asleep in the next room, tucked beneath the blankets Logan had scrounged from the closet. His soft snores were a reminder of why we were here, why we couldn't afford to let our guard down. But the peace shattered in an instant. It started with a faint rustling outside, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Then came the growls low and guttural, circling the cabin like wolves scenting their prey. Logan was already on his feet, moving toward the window in a blur. They found us, he said, his voice a sharp whisper. My stomach dropped. How? They're rogues, he replied, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. They don't need much to go on. A loud crash at the back door made me flinch. Owen's frightened cry from the other room spurred me into action. I'll get him, I said, my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my chest. Logan nodded, his focus locked on the door. Stay with him. I'll hold them off. By the time I reached Owen's room, he was sitting upright, his wide eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Mom, what's happening? He asked, his voice shaking. Stay with me, sweetheart, I said, pulling him into my arms. It's going to be okay. Another crash echoed through the cabin, followed by the unmistakable sound of a snarl. My heart hammered in my chest as I moved toward the corner of the room, shielding Owen as best I could. And then the door burst open. Logan was a blur of motion, his claws slashing through the rogue that lunged at him. The room was chaos, snarls, growls, the sharp scent of blood in the air. But even in the midst of it all, I could see the strain on Logan's face, the way his movements were slowing, his breath coming harder. The rogues were too many, and he was only one man. "Logan," I shouted, the panic in my voice breaking through the noise. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw the same thought flicker across his face, the realization that we might not make it out of this. But then, Owen moved. He slipped from my arms before I could stop him, stepping into the center of the room. His small hands clenched into fists, and his glowing eyes burned brighter, lighting up the cabin like a beacon. "Owen, no." I reached for him, but it was too late. The air around him seemed to pulse, a tangible energy that made my skin prickle. And then, with a sharp cry, he thrust his hands outward. A wave of force exploded from him, slamming into the rogues like a tidal wave. They were thrown back, crashing into walls and crumpling to the ground in a heap. The air crackled with residual energy, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stared at Owen, my heart pounding in my chest. "Owen," I said softly, moving toward him. "Are you okay?" He turned to me, his glowing eyes wide and filled with tears. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt them." My chest tightened as I pulled him into my arms, smoothing his hair. "It's okay, baby," I said, my voice trembling. "You're okay. I've got you." Logan approached slowly, his face pale and drawn as he took in the scene. "He did that," he said, his voice a mix of awe and fear. I nodded, my arms tightening around Owen. "He saved us." "But at what cost?" Logan murmured, his gaze flicking to the unconscious rogues. His words sent a chill down my spine, but I shoved the thought aside. "He's just a kid, Logan," I said sharply. "Don't make him out to be something he's not." "He's more than that, Luna," Logan said, his voice steady but filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You know it as well as I do." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down I knew he was right. That night, as the adrenaline faded and the cabin settled into uneasy silence, Logan and I found ourselves sitting together by the hearth, Owen asleep between us. "I can't do this alone," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Logan's hand brushed mine, his touch warm and steady. "You're not alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." For a moment, I let myself believe him. Chapter 5. The day had started almost normally, as much as anything could feel normal anymore. Owen had been playing outside the cabin, his laughter echoing through the trees, while Logan kept a watchful eye from the porch. For a brief moment, I'd allowed myself to relax, to believe that we might actually be safe here. And then, they came. It happened so fast. One moment, I was inside the cabin folding Owen's clothes. The next, Logan's sharp shout ripped through the air. "Luna, get out here now." My heart plummeted as I sprinted outside, my worst fears realized in an instant. Rogues, 3 of them, had materialized out of the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malice. Owen stood frozen, his wide eyes locked on the tallest one, who crouched low as if ready to pounce. Logan was already in motion, his claws extended, his growl rumbling like thunder. "Run to your mom, Owen," Logan barked, but Owen didn't move. His small frame trembled, his hands twitching at his sides. I darted toward him, adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Owen, come here now." But before I could reach him, the tall rogue lunged. Everything blurred. Logan intercepted, slamming into the rogue with a force that shook the ground, but it was too late. One of the others had grabbed Owen, hoisting him like he weighed nothing. "No," I screamed, my legs carrying me forward as if sheer willpower could close the gap. Owen struggled, his small fists pounding against the rogue's chest, but the air around him shimmered, a telltale sign that his powers were waking up. Logan was on his feet in an instant, blood dripping from his claws as he turned toward the rogue holding Owen. "Put him down," he roared, his voice primal. The rogue grinned, his fangs glinting in the sunlight. "Catch us if you can." And then they were gone. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as I stumbled to where Owen had been moments before, the spot now empty and cold. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. "No, no, no." Logan stood motionless for a heartbeat, his fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. Then he turned to me, his expression a mixture of fury and anguish. "We'll get him back," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his eyes. I rounded on him, my grief and fear exploding into anger. "This is your fault," I shouted, my voice cracking. "They came because of you." Logan flinched, his jaw tightening. "You think I don't know that?" he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "If you hadn't come back, if you hadn't dragged us into this, none of this would be happening." My words were venomous, each one laced with the pain that felt too big to bear. Logan didn't argue, he just stood there, his shoulders sagging under the weight of my accusation. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission stopped me in my tracks. "I'll fix it," he continued, his gaze locking onto mine. "I'll bring him back. I swear it." Logan, I started, but he cut me off with a look that silenced me. "You don't trust me, Luna. I get that. But right now Owen needs me more than you hate me." The words hit like a slap, and before I could respond, Logan turned and shifted in one fluid motion. His wolf form was a blur of power and grace as he darted into the forest, leaving me standing there, hollow and shaking. The stillness that followed was unbearable. The echoes of Owen's cries, Logan's roar, and my own shouts seemed to linger in the air, a cruel reminder of everything I'd just lost. I sank to my knees, my chest heaving as tears spilled down my cheeks. For the first time in years, I felt truly powerless. And for the first time, I realized how much I needed Logan. The forest felt emptier without him. Logan was gone, his absence a gaping wound in the already fragile balance of my world. The faint scent of him still lingered, a reminder of the promise he'd made before disappearing into the shadows. "I'll bring him back," he'd said, his voice like steel, his wolf already bristling with purpose. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that the man who had hurt me, abandoned me, could now be the one to fix everything. But trust didn't come easily, not anymore, not with so much at stake. I paced the cabin, like a caged animal, every creak of the floorboards grating against my nerves. My mind replayed the moment Owen was taken, his small frame snatched away while I stood there helpless. The memory felt like claws raking down my spine. And then there was Logan, his face as I'd hurled my anger at him, his quiet acceptance of my blame. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. "You should have stopped him," I muttered to the empty room. "You should have made him stay." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Logan had left because it was the only thing he could do. Because he couldn't bear to lose Owen any more than I could. The hours dragged. Night settled over the forest, bringing with it a cold silence that seeped into my bones. I lit the lanterns one by one, their soft glow doing little to chase away the shadows crowding the cabin. Every sound outside made me jump, a rustle of leaves, the distant howl of wolves. I found myself moving toward the window again and again, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of him. He wouldn't come back. Not yet. Not until he'd found Owen. But what if he didn't come back at all? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I wrapped my arms around myself, as if that could hold me together. My anger toward him felt hollow now, an empty shell of a defense I didn't need anymore. What I did need was him alive, whole, and here to face this fight with me. I wandered into Owen's room, the small bed still rumpled from where he'd slept the night before. His favorite stuffed wolf lay on the floor, its fur worn from years of love. I picked it up, clutching it to my chest as tears pricked my eyes. "Mom, what's happening?" His voice echoed in my mind, the memory so vivid it made my breath hitch. The weight of it all crashed down on me, then my failure to protect him, my fear of what was happening to him, and my longing for Logan to make good on his promise. But Logan couldn't do this alone. I knew that now, as surely as I knew the sun would rise again. I straightened, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. The room seemed to sharpen around me, my focus narrowing on what needed to be done. Logan had left to save Owen, and I was going after him. The decision settled over me like a second skin, familiar and unshakable. Logan and I had always been a team, even when we were at odds. If there was any chance of bringing Owen back, it would take both of us. I moved quickly, grabbing what supplies I could: blankets, food, water, a first aid kit. The weight of the bag on my shoulders was grounding, a reminder that I was still capable, still strong. Before I left, I glanced around the cabin one last time. The flickering lantern light made the shadows dance, but they didn't scare me anymore. "I'm coming, Owen," I whispered, my voice steady. And then, softer, "Wait for me, Logan." I stepped out into the night, the forest swallowing me whole as I followed the faint trail he'd left behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I wouldn't let Logan face this alone. Not again. The forest at night was a different kind of beast, alive, pulsing, and completely unforgiving. Twigs snapped underfoot, shadows darted in the corners of my vision, and the air was thick with the sense of pine, earth, and danger. Logan's trail wasn't hard to follow. He hadn't tried to hide it. A snapped branch here, a faint scuff of dirt there. I moved quickly, my heartbeat pounding in rhythm with my steps. I didn't stop to second-guess my decision. There was no time for doubt. Every second I hesitated was another second Owen was in danger. But more than that, it was another second Logan spent fighting this battle alone. The thought of him out there, wounded, vulnerable, facing gods only knew what, twisted something deep in my chest. My anger toward him, which had burned so fiercely earlier, had dimmed to a stubborn ache. Because the truth was, I didn't just blame Logan. I missed him. I missed the man who'd once made me laugh until my sides ached, the man who'd stood by me through every challenge, until his sudden disappearance. And now, knowing what he'd endured, what he was still enduring, my anger felt small in comparison to the love I hadn't quite let go of. A low growl in the distance pulled me from my thoughts. My breath hitched, and I ducked behind a tree, peering through the branches. The forest was quiet again, but my senses were on high alert. "Logan," I whispered under my breath, hoping he could feel the pull of our bond. "Where are you?" I moved carefully, my steps quieter now as I followed his trail. It led me deeper into the woods, the canopy above blocking out the moonlight and casting the path in shadow. And then I saw a faint flicker of movement ahead. "Logan," I called softly, my voice carrying just enough to reach him without alerting anyone or anything else. He turned sharply, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of a distant fire. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the distance between us feeling far greater than it was. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and edged with frustration. "Stopping you from being stupid," I shot back, crossing the space between us. "I told you to stay," he said, his tone sharp now. "And when have I ever done what you told me?" I countered, planting my hands on my hips. Logan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Luna, this isn't safe. You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said, stepping closer. "But here we are." He stared at me, his jaw tight, his eyes dark and unreadable. "This isn't just about Owen, is it?" My breath caught, his words cutting through the layers of armor I'd built around myself. "It's always about Owen," I said softly, my voice trembling. "But it's about you too, Logan. And us. And everything we lost."
His expression shifted, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something raw, something vulnerable. "Luna, I'm not letting you do this alone," I interrupted, my voice steady now. "I've already lost too much. I'm not losing you too." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, the world narrowing to just the two of us. "Why do you always have to be so stubborn?" Logan finally said, his lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. "Must be contagious," I replied, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him really smile. It didn't last long, but it was enough. Enough to remind me of who we'd been before everything fell apart. Enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. As we stood there, side by side in the shadowed forest, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. Until now, we were strongest together. And no matter what came next, I wasn't letting him go again. Chapter 6. The forest erupted into chaos around me, snarls, shouts, and the sickening sound of claws meeting flesh. The rogues had cornered us, their numbers far greater than I'd anticipated. My heart pounded in my chest as I dodged a swipe from one of them, my wolf instinct screaming at me to shift, to fight, to protect. But then I saw him. Logan. He tore through the rogues like a force of nature, his movements fluid and feral. His wolf form shimmered with raw power, every strike deliberate, every motion lethal. My breath caught as I watched him, the familiar pull of our bond rushing through me like a tidal wave. Luna, his voice cut through the noise as he shifted mid-motion, his human form just as commanding as his wolf. Are you hurt? I shook my head, gripping the makeshift staff I'd picked up along the way. I'm fine. But Owen, I know, he said, his voice tight. His eyes darted past me to where Owen was huddled behind a tree, his small hands glowing faintly with energy. We'll get to him. Stay close to me. Before I could argue, another rogue lunged toward us. Logan moved faster than I could track, intercepting the attack with a growl that sent shivers down my spine. Stay back, he snarled, his eyes flicking to me for just a second. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. But I wasn't about to let him fight alone. We moved as a team, an unspoken rhythm guiding our steps. Every time I struck a rogue, Logan was there to cover me, his strength and speed a perfect counterpoint to my agility. It was as if the years of separation had melted away, leaving only the trust we'd once shared. Behind you, I shouted, spinning to block a rogue's attack as Logan took down another. Nice save, he said, his lips quirking into a quick grin before he turned back to the fight. Don't get used to it, I shot back, my heart pounding, but the truth was I didn't mind. The rogues were relentless, their attacks wild and uncoordinated, but no less dangerous. Sweat dripped down my brow as I fought, my muscles burning with every movement. But through it all, Logan's presence was like an anchor, grounding me even as the chaos threatened to overwhelm us. When the last rogue fell, silence settled over the clearing like a heavy blanket. I leaned against a tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps as Logan straightened beside me. We did it, he said, his voice low but steady. I glanced at him, my chest tightening at the sight of the cuts and bruises marring his skin. Barely, I muttered, though the corner of my mouth twitched into a faint smile. He turned to me then, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. Luna, he said softly, stepping closer. Before he could say more, a faint whimper broke the quiet. Owen, I whispered, my heart lurching as I turned toward the sound. Logan followed, his steps sure and steady as we approached the tree where Owen was still huddled. The sight of him, small, scared, but alive, brought a wave of relief so strong I nearly collapsed. Owen, Logan said gently, crouching beside him. Owen's wide eyes flicked to Logan, then to me, his small hands still glowing faintly. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, dropping to my knees and pulling him into my arms. You're okay. We've got you. Logan's hand rested on Owen's shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. We've got you, he echoed, his voice filled with a quiet strength that made my chest ache. For the first time, it felt like we weren't fighting this battle alone. Owen was trembling, his small hands glowing brighter with every passing second. The energy pulsed around him, crackling like a live wire and making the air feel thick and charged. I tightened my arms around him, trying to soothe him, but his panic was overwhelming both of us. Mom, I can't stop it, he cried, his voice breaking. Yes, you can, I whispered, brushing his curls away from his damp forehead. You're stronger than this, Owen, you can control it. But I could see the fear in his eyes, the doubt. My words weren't enough. Luna, Logan said softly, crouching beside us. His voice was steady, calm. The kind of calm that made you believe in it. Owen's tearful gaze flicked to him. Hey, buddy, Logan said, his lips curving into a faint smile. You're okay, I've got you. Owen shook his head, the glow from his hands intensifying. I'm not okay, I'm gonna hurt you. No, you're not, Logan said firmly, reaching out to place his hands gently over Owen's. The glow flickered at the contact, dimming just slightly. You're not going to hurt anyone, Owen. Not while I'm here. Logan, I said, my voice trembling with both fear and gratitude. He glanced at me, his eyes softening for just a moment before returning to Owen. You feel that? He asked, squeezing Owen's hands gently. Owen nodded, his breath hitching. It's too much. It's not too much, Logan said. It's a lot, yeah, but it's not too much. You're in control. You're stronger than it, Owen. I know you are. The glow dimmed again, the sparks of energy around us flickering out one by one. That's it, Logan said, his voice filled with quiet encouragement. Breathe with me. In and out, nice and slow. Owen's breathing evened out, his small chest rising and falling in time with Logan's steady rhythm. The glow faded completely, leaving only the faint hum of residual energy in the air. You did it, Logan said, smiling as he ruffled Owen's curls. I knew you could. Owen stared at him, his wide eyes still shimmering with tears. Really? Really, Logan said, his voice warm and full of pride. I felt the tension in my chest loosen for the first time since this nightmare had begun. Watching Logan with Owen, seeing the way he instinctively knew how to calm him, how to reach him, it was like watching a part of my heart slot back into place. You're good at this, I said softly, my voice catching. Logan turned to me, his expression unreadable for a moment before it softened. He's my son, he said simply, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. As we sat there in the quiet aftermath, the three of us huddled together, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe before. Logan wasn't just a part of Owen's life, he was a part of mine too. The forest was silent now, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and Owen's steady breathing as he finally drifted to sleep in the makeshift bed Logan had crafted from blankets. The air still buzzed faintly with the energy of what had just happened, but the danger had passed for now. I stood a few feet away, watching Logan as he adjusted the last blanket over Owen. His movements were careful, almost reverent, and something about the way his shoulders relaxed when he stepped back tugged at a part of me I'd long since walled off. Luna, he said softly, turning to me. His voice carried a weight that made my heart thrum in my chest. I straightened, crossing my arms in an attempt to shield myself from the storm of emotions building inside me. What? Logan's lips twitched into a faint smile as he closed the distance between us, his presence magnetic, as always. You don't have to do that, he said, his voice low, almost teasing. Do what? I asked, raising an eyebrow, though my voice betrayed the crack in my defenses. Pretend like you don't feel it, he said, his tone soft but sure. The bond, it's still there, Luna. It never left. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. You can't just walk back into my life and say things like that. I know, he admitted, his voice full of raw honesty. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the pain, the loss, the years spent wondering where he was and why he'd left. But the way he was looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered made the words dissolve on my tongue. I hate you, I whispered, though the words carried no weight. No, you don't, he said, stepping closer. His hand brushed my cheek, his touch featherlight, but enough to make my breath hitch. You're mad at me. And you have every right to be. Damn right I do, I said, my voice trembling. Logan's thumb traced my jawline, his touch sending shivers down my spine, and I'm going to spend every day proving to you that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm staying. For you, for Owen. Tears pricked my eyes, and I hated them for showing him how close I was to breaking. Logan. But before I could finish, his lips were on mine. The kiss was everything soft and urgent, hesitant and passionate all at once. It was years of longing and pain crashing together, igniting something I thought I'd lost forever. I sank into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as he pulled me closer, his hands settling on my waist like they belonged there. His warmth, his strength, the way he whispered my name between kisses, it was overwhelming in the best way. You're mine, Luna, he murmured against my lips, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver through me. I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, my hands trembling as they rested on his chest. You don't get to say that after all this time, I know, he said, his eyes dark and filled with emotion. But it's true. It's always been true. My heart twisted, torn between the ache of everything we'd been through and the undeniable pull of the bond between us. Logan. He silenced me with another kiss, this one deeper, more urgent. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a declaration, a plea. And I kissed him back, letting myself fall into the moment, into him. When we finally pulled apart, our breaths mingling in the cool night air, Logan rested his forehead against mine. I love you, he said softly, the words filled with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. I closed my eyes, letting the truth of his words settle over me like a warm blanket. I love you too, I whispered, the admission breaking something open inside me. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like he never wanted to let go. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that he wouldn't. Because we weren't just surviving anymore. We were together. And that was enough.
Chapter 7. The pack gathered beneath the sprawling canopy of trees, the forest alive with the hum of anticipation. Soft moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver patterns on the ground, and a gentle breeze carried the mingled scents of pine, earth, and home. For the first time in what felt like forever, peace settled over us like a warm blanket. Logan stood at the center of the clearing, his broad shoulders relaxed, though his stance was still commanding. He belonged here in this place with these people. And despite everything that had happened, it was impossible to imagine him anywhere else. I lingered at the edge of the gathering, watching as the pack began to move closer, their murmurs soft but filled with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a moment. Sophia, the pack's ever-practical beta, stepped forward, her expression a mix of respect and relief. Logan Reed, she said, her voice carrying over the quiet, we've waited a long time for this. Logan inclined his head, his gaze sweeping over the pack before settling on Sophia. And I've waited a long time to come back, he replied, his tone steady. The murmurs quieted, the pack hanging on his every word. You all know what's happened, Logan continued, his voice strong but laced with emotion. The rogues are gone. The threat is over. And this pack, our pack, has proven just how strong we are when we stand together. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking under the weight of Logan's words. Sophia stepped closer, her sharp eyes flicking to me for just a moment before returning to Logan. It's time, she said simply. Logan nodded, his gaze finding mine across the clearing. For a moment, everything else faded away, the pack, the forest, even the moonlight. It was just him and me. Luna, he said, his voice softer now. Come here. I hesitated for the briefest second, my heart pounding in my chest. But then I stepped forward, my boots crunching softly against the leaves as I made my way to his side. The pack parted to let me through, their gazes warm and welcoming. It was a stark contrast to the wary looks I'd faced not long ago, and it filled me with a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd missed. When I reached Logan, he held out his hand, his eyes locked on mine. This isn't just about me, he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. It's about us, about what we can build together. I slipped my hand into his, the warmth of his touch steadying me. He turned back to the pack, his fingers tightening around mine. Luna Carter isn't just my mate, he said, his voice ringing out clear and strong. She's my equal, and she'll stand with me to lead this pack into whatever comes next. The pack erupted into cheers, their voices carrying through the trees like a song of celebration. I felt my cheeks flush, but I stood tall, my hand still firmly in Logan's. When he turned back to me, his smile was soft, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and something deeper. You ready for this? He asked, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I smiled, my heart swelling with a mix of love and determination. Always, I said. As the pack surrounded us, their energy electric with excitement, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until now. We weren't just rebuilding a pack. We were building a future, together. The morning sun filtered through the trees, painting the clearing in warm golds and greens. The pack's training grounds, usually buzzing with energy, were quieter than I'd expected, but the small group gathered near the center made up for it, with sheer determination. Owen stood among them, his small frame squared and determined as he focused on Sophia, who was demonstrating a defensive stance. His curls gleamed in the sunlight, and his serious expression reminded me so much of Logan that it made my chest ache. I leaned against a tree at the edge of the clearing, watching him. Logan stood a few feet away, his arms crossed as he observed our son. Every now and then, he'd nod or offer a small word of encouragement, his deep voice carrying just enough to let Owen know he was paying attention. You're gripping too tight, kid, Sophia said, her tone patient but firm. Loosen up. You can't channel energy if you're choking your focus. Owen frowned but adjusted his stance, his small hands glowing faintly as he tried again. There you go, Logan said, his voice warm with approval. Now aim for the target. Owen glanced at him, his eyes wide and uncertain. What if I miss? Logan's lips curved into a reassuring smile. Then you try again. Missing's part of learning, Owen. You've got this. I couldn't help but smile as I watched them. Logan had always had a way with people, but seeing him like this with Owen, with our son, it was something else entirely. He's good with him, Sophia said, appearing beside me. I nodded, my chest tightening with emotion. He is. Sophia's gaze shifted to Logan, her expression softening. He's good with you too. Better than I've seen him in years. I glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. He's different now, I admitted, my voice quiet, but in a good way. He's whole again, she said simply, and that's because of you. The words settled over me, warm and heavy, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Owen's voice broke through my thoughts. Did you see that, Mom? He called, his face lighting up with excitement as a small burst of energy shot from his hands, hitting the target dead center. I saw, I called back, grinning. You were amazing. Owen beamed, his chest puffing out with pride as he turned back to Logan. Did you see Dad? Logan crouched to meet Owen's gaze, his smile wide and genuine. I saw, buddy, you nailed it. Great job. The two of them shared a high five, and my heart swelled so much I thought it might burst. As the training session wound down, Owen ran over to me, his cheeks flushed with exertion but his eyes shining with happiness. "Did you see how good I did, Mom?" he asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "I saw, sweetheart," I said, ruffling his curls. "You were incredible." Logan joined us then, his presence grounding as he placed a hand on Owen's shoulder. "You're going to be a great leader one day, Owen," he said, his voice filled with pride. "But for now, just keep practicing, okay?" Owen nodded, his grin stretching ear to ear. "I will." As he ran off to join the other kids, Logan turned to me, his expression soft. "He's something else, isn't he?" I nodded, my heart full. "He really is." "And he gets it from you," Logan added, his tone teasing but warm. I laughed, rolling my eyes. "Don't start." But Logan just smiled, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment longer than necessary. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Because we were a family. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, its silver light spilling over the clearing like a blessing. The pack had gathered, their soft murmurs fading into a reverent hush as Logan and I stepped into the circle at the heart of the forest. The air felt alive, humming with energy, and the promise of something eternal. I adjusted the flowing dress I'd chosen for the occasion, the fabric brushing softly against my legs. It wasn't elaborate, just a simple white that caught the moonlight in the most magical way, but it felt right. Logan stood beside me, looking every bit the alpha he was, his dark hair catching the light, and his eyes glowing faintly in the silver glow. His presence was steady, grounding, and as he reached for my hand, I felt the tension in my chest ease. "You look nervous," he murmured, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I glanced at him, arching an eyebrow. "You're the one who convinced the entire pack to watch us have a moment, so maybe you should be the nervous one." Logan's lips twitched into a grin. "Fair point." Sophia stepped forward, her expression calm but warm as she addressed the pack. "Tonight we gather not just to celebrate victory, but to honor the bond that makes us stronger, the bond that unites not just two hearts, but a family and a pack." The pack responded with quiet murmurs of agreement, their collective energy filling the air. Logan squeezed my hand, and I looked up at him, finding his gaze already locked on mine. "This is it," he said softly, his voice filled with a mix of pride and something deeper. I swallowed hard, my heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah," I whispered, "this is it." Sophia nodded toward Logan, signaling for him to speak first. He took a step closer to me, his other hand reaching up to gently cup my cheek. "Luna," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were something special. Strong, fearless, stubborn as hell, but always with the biggest heart. You've been my mate in every way that matters, even when I didn't deserve it. And now, I'm ready to stand beside you not just as your mate but as your partner, your equal, and your family." Tears pricked my eyes, and I blinked quickly, trying not to let them fall. "I vow to protect you," Logan continued, his voice breaking slightly, "to fight for you, to love you always, and to never take for granted the gift that you and Owen have given me." The pack let out a soft hum of approval, and I had to take a moment to steady myself before it was my turn. I stepped forward, closing the small space between us as I reached up to touch Logan's face. His eyes searched mine, glowing faintly, and I felt the bond between us hum like a live wire. "Logan," I began, my voice soft but clear, "you have always been my mate, even when I hated you. Even when I tried not to love you, you've always been the one." His lips quirked into a faint smile, and I couldn't help but grin back. I've fought so hard to protect Owen, to keep him safe, but the truth is, I couldn't have done it without you. You are his father, and you are my partner. And I vow to stand with you, through everything, every fight, every joy, every challenge. Logan's hand tightened on mine, his eyes glinting with a fierceness that made my heart skip. "I vow to love you," I finished, my voice trembling but sure. "Even when you're stubborn. Even when you drive me crazy. Always." Sophia stepped forward again, her voice carrying over the clearing. Then by the power of this pack, and the bond you share, I declare you united mates, leaders, and family." The pack erupted into cheers, their howls rising into the night like a song of celebration. Logan pulled me into his arms, his lips crashing against mine in a kiss that felt like coming home. The world around us faded, leaving only the warmth of his embrace and the quiet promise of forever. As the pack celebrated around us, I glanced up at Logan, my heart full. "What now?" I asked, my voice soft but filled with anticipation. Logan smiled, his hand brushing against my cheek. "Now," he said, "we build a future. Together." And under the light of the full moon, with the pack around us and our son safe and smiling, I knew we could face anything. Together.